I think twofold. One, I think the product data is really important. So there's just missing out on opportunity by having poor product data, which is really the fundamental piece that it matters right now. Your competitors could be getting recommended in AI because because these platforms just don't know that your data is correct, and that also plays into Google Ads. It also plays into other channels. So fundamentally, making sure your product data is in a good format has never been so important and never been so rewarding. Also then, proving that out, proving those structures out through A/B testing, also very important, so you know that actually that is the right pattern for that product data and you've got the complete product data set. Then I think there's elements like ads, maybe test them, but I think also that this is very, very early. So I think that the main point is not to get distracted or into the pure hype of it is coming. It's not just hype, but right now it is single digit.
Most marketers are still following old playbooks written decades ago. The rules have changed, but the advice hasn't. Flipping the Playbook is your license to rebel. This is your front row seat to finding out how leading CMOs are tearing up the old rules and building strategies that move the needle. If you're tired of being told that this is how it's done, let's flip the playbook together. Here's your host, Reza Mayandin.
Welcome to the show. Today's episode looks at how retail is changing and what that means for growth. Liam Patterson is the co-founder of Bidnamic, a platform built for retailers to get the full potential of Google Shopping. Liam regularly appears in media as an expert commentator, and he has a wealth of experience and knowledge in the e-commerce space. Today he's joining us to share the lesson from scaling from the UK to US and how AI is reshaping paid visibility and e-commerce performance. Liam, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Excited to be here.
Let's get started by talking about Bidnamic. Tell us what it is and what problems you're trying to solve.
Yeah, so we work with e-commerce retailers really to help them on their Google Ads, particularly their Google Shopping. I guess the typical problems that people will come with us to is kind of when they're not getting the desired return on ad spend, or maybe they're not getting the desired profit from it, or they feel like they've hit a ceiling in terms of their ad spend. They've been at that same spend, driving that same profit. How do they get to that next level? And they're the kind of challenges that we frequently get involved with and try to solve through an array of technology that we've built out ourselves in-house.
And how did Bidnamic start? How did you end up creating Bidnamic?
Yeah, so like we were just saying in the pre-call, actually we actually started as a marketplace many years ago. So we actually were our own e-commerce marketplace, working with thousands of illustrators, artists, and some amazing artists, some absolutely terrible, and they were uploading all kinds of images. And it was a print-on-demand marketplace, so they could take their image, digitally transpose it onto a phone case, a T-shirt, a mug, and then we'd advertise that, and we would then fulfill it through a network of dropship print-on-demand suppliers. So they would, whether they bought in America or Germany or the UK, it'd be locally printed and shipped. So kind of more environmentally friendly, better for the customer, and the artist receives a royalty from the sale. And we built all the technology of uploading the images, the mock-ups, the creation. And I suppose what we came across was really the biggest challenge we were solving was that demand gen. How do these artists, illustrators get exposure, particularly through Google, and do that profitably? And we, in the course of scaling that business, we took on angel investment, some from Marion Mayer, co-founder of Booking.com, Chris Forrest, who's on the board of Net-a-Porter, some really high profile successful individuals, and they kind of kept coming back to us saying, how can you take your technology that you've built here and really scale this incredible efficiency and high volume for these artists? Could you take that to some of our portfolio companies? And we were very anti this. We built this technology for ourselves. We had no client servicing experience. We'd never done anything like that in terms of that piece. And but they were pretty persistent, and eventually actually we worked with a few of their portfolio companies, and I suppose we learned about recurring revenue. So in e-commerce, it's the highs of, particularly in that business, the Novembers, the Decembers, huge Q4 demand, and then it drops down in January when the gift market kind of moves on. Whereas what we saw here was this ability to build, month on month, win new business. That business is there. It's just compounding up and up. So the revenue's just building every single month. So yeah, we kind of got into that SaaS, that recurring revenue model. We started to really learn about, and then I suppose we kind of went there a bit idealistically. We would say, okay, how would we want to be serviced? How would we want to be sold to? And because we haven't ever had any experience, me or my co-founders, then that allowed us to really kind of reimagine what it would be like to do the sales motions, to do the success and the delivery. And we learned a lot from the customers, and roll on quite a few years now. We've got now pretty much the market leader in this sector, working with many high profile brands and hundreds of high profile brands as well. So it's been a really exciting journey, and we've had venture funding in there as well. So lots of areas.
Quite a lot that's happened over the years. I want to take you back to the early days. What did you see in Google Shopping that other e-commerce brands were underestimating that allowed you to get to where you are now?
Yeah, so I think a lot of it was the kind of the control. So a lot of people we'd speak to, and they'd say, we're getting a 5 times, we're getting a 6 times return on ad spend. But actually that was really disconnected from the margin of the products. So, they've got a 5 times return on ad spend across all their products, but actually they've got some products that are really on discount, that are clearance products that are actually very, very low margin and would be making a loss at a 5 times. Firstly, they've got products that are they're new stock, they're their own brand, they're very margin rich, 70 or 80% margin, where that 5 times return on ad spend is very inefficient. Actually, you could have a lower target and you could get a lot more exposure and revenue. So part of it was really about being able to align the targets in a really smart way and have that control. And that's where we found the challenges many of the challenges that we're able to then start to solve with technology.
Okay. And Bidnamic plays in a space that sounds quite technical from the outside. How did you then that turn into a proposition for retailers who can then immediately understand the product? What did you do there?
Yeah, so I think a lot of it was around what we call a free audit. So it's about irrelevant of if someone's really experienced, they've been, it's top brand, they've been in the industry for maybe decades even, or people who've built really fast growth, really strong businesses, but actually this isn't their primary growth channel. They're really strong at product knowledge. They're not experts at the marketing, at the Google ads, really specific side. So we created an audit. So we were able to link into an account, extract the data, present it back in a really understandable way that highlighted the opportunities within the account, highlighted some of the bottlenecks, highlighted the solutions to those, and really ran through in a really conversational way, which was extremely educational for those going through it. They left with insights and opportunities they could implement themselves or work with ourselves on our technology to solve as well.
And through those audits that you tend to do or used to do, what is it that most retail brands still get wrong about shopping ads and feed-driven performance? What is the most common thing that often happens?
Yeah, so often there's a lot of products that are overlooked. So there's the hero products that they're going to sell anyway. They're the products that brand is really well known for. The hero products that they're maybe stocked by the stockists, but then you've got the mid tail or long tail of the products that they're also selling. And so often, Google, through the way it's built, will favor those products that sell. It knows the performance metrics on that sell very well. So it's Google's, even if it's not quite relevant, the search term when it goes in, maybe it's talking about a different size, different color, even if it's style, Google will favor and it will show that hero product again and again because it's got a lot of data on it. And this kind of casts a shadow over the rest of the range or the rest of the inventory, which can be totally underlooked. It can miss out on impressions, it can miss out on revenue. So yeah, there's a big overlooked area of the products, which you don't see at a high level because you just see, great, the ad spend, we're achieving our return on ad spend, or the other metrics you're looking at. But actually, once you go a level deeper, you start to see this inefficiency of products that just aren't getting exposure.
Okay, all right, that's fascinating. And what then happens behind the scenes? Like, that allows these products then to come up? And does that often even change some of the strategy or the sales strategy of the business that you advise?
Yeah, so with the audit, we'd link into their Google Ads account, we'd link into their Shopify store, we'd link into their merchant center, so kind of the source of truth, and we'd look what is the area that's holding them back. So we actually have different scores that we run. So one could be around the merchant center. Sometimes the reason they're not getting exposure isn't because of the way it's set up in Google Ads, but it's actually the product data. So they might not have the right title structures, they might not have the right attributes in there, so they might be missing the color, the size, the style, the age, the gender, and materials that the products are built from, depending on the different categories of products. So often it can be around the product feed that's supplied from the retailer to Google or Google Merchant Center. So we analyze the product feed and we see, is that the reason why the exposure? And we're able to score that. Another area that we look at would be the Google ad structure. Has this been recognized, this kind of this long tail of products that aren't selling, and has there been strategies put in place? For example, are these products, maybe they're lower margin and that means they're just not getting exposure? But equally, maybe there's some very high margin products in there that if they were to lower the targets, still be very profitable, you could actually gain the exposure. So there's all kinds of different reasons why it could be. Could be the product data, could be the strategy, could be the targets. But that's what the audit kind of allows us to see. And we use a lot of benchmarks as well. So as we've grown over the years, one of our biggest assets has been the benchmark. So we've got thousands and thousands of e-commerce stores that we're live connected into, and that allows us to bring in normalized benchmarks. So we're able to say, okay, you're a retailer of lighting. How does other retailers in lighting compare? Because there's always going to be products that aren't going to sell, but are you significantly different to your benchmark? How's your CPC compared to that? How does your return ad spend compare to that? Your conversion rate. So these can really help us to pinpoint the problem, which could be outside of our area. It could be this storefront itself, or it could fall into our wheelhouse as well.
Okay. All right. Wonderful. And you touched on something quite interesting. You said there are products that often aren't exposed for various reasons. Now, I want to bring it to your own business. You've recently expanded Bidnamic into US, which is a market that I guess you hadn't touched before, and now you're trying to grow it. What drove that decision at the stage of the company?
Yeah, so a lot of it's because the technology is agnostic. It can be run wherever wherever the retailers are based, and also just the size of the market. So we're very frequently out in the US at all the major trade show events, and I think when you speak to these brands, you really start to understand the scale of the market. So what we would consider a very large brand, maybe a household brand that we'd all recognize, and when we speak to retailers out there, they'll be introducing themselves. Oh, we're a very small family-owned business, only operating in this one state. And then we connect to the ads, we do the audit, and we realize they're bigger than the biggest brands in the UK for their ad spend on Google. So it's just like, wow, like you're in one little vertical in one state and you're at the same level as the brands in the UK. It's crazy.
So that's a huge difference.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
what is the difference now you're seeing in selling to US versus the UK or European ones?
Yeah. I think culturally it's very different. I think the American market is very open. They're not, if there's a good opportunity and they run the maths on it, and they can see that there's a clear upside, there's a good clear strategy, then they'll give it a go. They'll jump into it. They'll commit to it. Sure, they'll do some sensible due diligence, maybe speak to some clients. They'll do those parts. But when the maths stacks up, when the opportunity is clearly there, then they'll go ahead of it. And that's irrelevant of the size of the companies. So really they'll move quickly, and that can be weeks. And on much bigger deal sizes. Then the UK is kind of in the middle, obviously British ourselves, but there's good pace, but I think there's a little bit more skepticism in the British culture. And then Europeans, and my co-founder's German, and we've done a number of different events in Germany and around Europe, and we never managed to really have much success. Very challenging in terms of their skepticism, in terms of getting the attention, really wanting to work with very localized businesses in those regions. Obviously, there's elements like the language barrier, which comes into it as well. So yeah, I'd definitely say for us, the American market is absolutely where we're focused as a business. Still growing very strongly in the UK, but mainly it's been the US, where the brands are so much bigger, the spend is so much bigger, decision making is quicker. It's competitive to win the business, but I feel we're fortunately we're in that competitive set now. So
And going into US, obviously completely a different environment. Did anything break, or you had to change in your go-to-market strategy once you entered US?
yeah, definitely. So I think one of the big it was more a shift in the whole go-to-market motions around outbound. So and for many years we've grown very effectively through really very targeted outbound. So understanding the companies, analyzing from the outside that they would have a need for what we're doing, and so they're active on Google Shopping. They've got some clear challenges around that we can see from the outside, and then doing really smart outbound, whether that's through LinkedIn, whether that's through kind of cold calling, whether that's through events, just to get on the radar to get their attention. And that went very well, really scaled the business predominantly through outbound for many years. So just that motion, and it worked very well in the US. So we, after closing £4 million from Gresham House, we replicated it into the US. So we created a team there of around 20 out of Austin, and they ran the outbound motion, and it worked very well. Within 4 months, they repaid their costs, won some phenomenal brands. So we're like, right, let's double down on this. This is, this has got that motion. It's clearly working. And then, so we doubled the team to about 40. And at that point, across not just ourselves, but the whole of SaaS and this kind of motion was it just got much more difficult in terms of outbound calling, in terms of LinkedIn, and that kind of motion just dropped in efficiency. So that was definitely a learning, which is just, what's worked, just because it's not what it worked in the US, but then it stops working. So I think you've just got to really keep a pulse and make sure you're building those other channels so that you don't end up reliant on one motion such as outbound, but instead you're building your inbound through other channels like SEO. You're supporting your events. So yeah, that was definitely a learning from our side.
And what would you do differently if you were expanding to US again tomorrow, like fresh start?
Yeah, I think what I would do is I'd realize actually that you don't need to be in the US. You need to be there very regularly for the trade shows. But I think it's such a huge country that actually people aren't really thinking, I'll come to your offices like we might do in the UK, right? We might go down to visit a client, or they might come to ourselves in Leeds. But actually it's not really like that in the US. The meeting spaces where everyone comes together are the big shows, the shop talks, the e-tail Wests, and the reciprocals for different verticals. So actually that's when they get together, the brands fly in as a team, they meet yourselves as vendors, but other vendors there as well. So really I think it's what we've learned is actually it's about having a presence at those events, because that's where the in-person component really comes from. And a lot of it can be done from the UK in terms of their delivery. The hours do overlap pretty well if you've got a team who are a bit flexible in terms of when they work. And yeah, I think the other thing is Americans love the Brits. So
They love the British accent, don't they?
Exactly. So I don't think I think part of it was, we need to have Americans so Americans can sell to Americans. But yes, actually, they love to talk about soccer, as they'd say, or football, as we would. Yeah, so play to your strengths. I think that's the learning, is that, a lot can be accomplished from the UK, for sure.
Yeah, of course. And I've seen that pattern with other businesses, and they've said we expanded into US. Actually, we could have just had the team in the UK, and we would have not even sometimes needed to expand further out into US, and we could have still sell to US. So
yeah,
big difference.
And the salaries are very expensive in America. All this associated costs as well. So that definitely plays into it as well, and also spreading your talent. Right, you've got, if the founders myself and the founder, I've got family here, so not as flexible to uproot our lives with the children and move to America. So that then makes that challenge. It creates opportunity for other team to lead, and we had some phenomenal individuals who led that team in America, in Austin. But also, it creates challenges culturally. They're not going to be around, say, the CFO or other C-suite members or other senior managers as well. So,
Of course. Moving away from the US side, I wanna talk about another topic that's two-lettered, like US, but AI. Uh, Bidnamic has been talking about AI-driven search and how the experience is changing, how brands will stay visible. What's your real view? Is this an evolution of search ads change or something bigger?
Yeah, I think it's a huge evolution. I think we shouldn't underestimate it. I'm sure, like our team, we're constantly using all of the AI tools ourselves in our daily lives, in our personal lives. It's created huge efficiencies. I think when you look to Google, it's a little bit more complicated. They've got a very clear ad revenue. They've got a clear model that they want to build and protect there. So they're going to be feeding in these different ad components with AI, and a lot of the bidding models and the signals are using AI already, and they have done for a long time. But I think we're going to see significant changes in that space. And I think the other real component is it's something that we should be cognizant of today, but also aware that it is a very, very small amount. So right now, for when we're actually looking at the volume that are coming through generative platforms, whether that's ChatGPT or the like, it's kind of single digit percentage. It's 4%, 3%. It's a tiny, tiny amount of clicks, let alone revenue, which is even smaller. So it's kind of this challenge where when we're having that conversation, it's definitely, in everyone's mind that they want to be very prevalent. They want to be very dominant on these tools where people are going to be searching in the future. But actually today, the volumes are incredibly low. So it's just that balancing act to invest in it at the right time so you don't get left behind, but also to be aware that any investment, it's going to be tough to have a business case behind it because you're talking about a few $100s of revenue coming through for a medium to large brand a month. So, when they start investing into that, anything's going to be a significantly negative ROI at that scale.
So of course. But we've also got things like AI summaries, the conversational search that's happening. And what happens then to the traditional paid media model, especially for e-commerce brands and Google Shopping? Because things are changing.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's getting woven in there. So it's clearly in Google's interest to continue to monetize through clicks effectively, wherever those clicks happen, or the style or the shape that they take place. But they're still driven through through charging for clicks through those sponsored ads, be them search ads or be them shopping ads. And yeah, I think that's also what ChatGPT have moved to as well. So we're going to see these ads, sponsored placements taking place, and I think that's not going away anytime soon. And hopefully it become a real native, really relevant experience. And that's, I think, the challenge is they've got to have the relevancy has to be there, otherwise it feels it doesn't feel a great experience. But I think I think that'll be sorted. I think that'll be clear. And in terms of kind of one of the tools we've developed is around what we call share of voice. So you can actually put a search term in and you can track your own visibility across paid and organic. And that's quite useful for brands who want to know, are we visible? Are we visible in terms of the core search terms that are really core to our brands, the core product lines, model numbers, those types of things, depending on the business, so they can track their own visibility.
Okay. All right. And what sort of search behaviors do you think are most likely to be at risk from AI changing the interface now?
Yeah, I think people will do a lot of planning through these products. So whether that's ChatGPT or others, I think people will really build out their whole journey. Whether that's researching for holidays, and then they'll just be coming at the point of purchase. So I think we're going to see a lot less clicks overall, but we're going to see a higher intent and conversion rate when those clicks do take place, because they will have already done a lot of that research through the generative platforms. So that's something that I definitely think will happen.
And do you think platforms like Claude, ChatGPT, and Perplexity, and everything else that goes around that they will jump on the ad systems? And are they doing anything about it at the moment?
Yeah, I use Claude heavily, and ChatGPT. ChatGPT have announced they are using they're going to be running ads, and they're also running across the universal product catalog as well. So Shopify and Google have come together along with other large platforms to provide product data in a universal catalog, so that these tools, rather than having to go to Shopify or go to merchants and get product feed or get product data that they can recommend, there's a universal huge catalog of probably billions of products from Shopify to all these other platforms that can then be surfaced in these AI recommendations. And then, how they monetize is kind of up to those platforms. So ChatGPT initially was talking about taking a revenue share on a successful transaction, which I think would have been really disruptive to the model. But unfortunately, in my opinion, they've now moved back to a cost per click model. So that's now
All
what
right.
they're
Okay.
doing.
That's interesting. And what is it that people can do to influence this universal product model?
Yeah, so if they're on a platform like Shopify, it's already out of the box. But in about a month's time, it's going to be a feature within Google Merchant Center, which houses your product data on the Google side. So in about a month's time, you'll be able to upload a feed, just like your Google product feed currently, which will then go across these different tools. So it should be really easy and low on absolutely no cost to do this. And then I think the optimization piece comes in. How do you know that product data you're providing is actually getting the results that you want? And this is a really exciting space. So it's exactly the same for Google Shopping as it is for these tools. You need to create very rich data, data heavy, make sure that you've got all those boring data entry pieces done of size, color, material, all that data in there in a structured, correct way. But then once you've got the data there, it's about moving it from having the data to making sure you've got the performance model around it. So running A/B tests to actually see, should you have the brand at the front? Should you have the product type, like a plasma TV? Should you have the size 55-inch? These are things that need to be tested for your product catalog, and you can do that for A/B testing. Again, we've got some models that we can use for that and work with brands on, but there's also obviously other providers there as well, and you can do it yourself over time as well.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that's great. Thank you. And do you think AI is going to make Google more powerful for retailers, or is it going to create an opening for other discovery channels?
Yeah, I think Google's always been great at kind of demand capture, people going to Google to search for products that they're right in the market for. I think it's not been great for creating demand. So I think Meta has inspired people to buy things that they never seen before, because they've been scrolling on Instagram and then suddenly they've seen something that really appeals to them, which is really personalized, which is just that perfect product that they never knew they wanted until they saw it. And that's the demand creation coming from platforms like that. So I think Google's always played in the lower funnel. And I think that they will continue to play in that position. Sure, it's discovery, but it's really the lower end of that. I think they'll get stronger at comparison in terms of comparison of products, maybe around price, maybe around delivery times, which right now I think is quite a poor experience in terms of people are buying things. We often ask shoppers, why does 65% of shoppers on average click on the first position on the carousel, the shopping ads carousel? And they say, oh, we believe it's the cheapest price, the quickest delivery, the most trusted. Whereas actually it's not. It's just that they are paying the most highest bid to get to the front of the carousel. So right now there is a disconnection between the value for the shopper and for the ad platform. And the ad platform or Google is putting themselves first because they want to have that highest cost per click. And that will probably start to become more changed and more woven into it, where, when there's tools that are just going to tell you where the quickest and the best price one is, I think that's going to change. And Google, I think, needs to get on board with that. But I still think that that last click is going to end up predominantly through Google, or people, being recommended it, then doing a final Google search just to sanity check it. And I think the transactions will still be taking place on e-commerce stores. I know there's quite a lot of talk around agentic, around bots doing the checkouts, and that might be the case for some uninspiring products like mouthwash or toothpaste, from trusted sites like Amazon or others. But I think, the shopping is still a hobby. People love this, so I think that's the experiential side of it, again, shouldn't be overlooked. And I think we're going to see some really creative environments created on e-commerce stores that are going to play more and more to that brand piece.
That's really fascinating the way you expanded that, especially talking about where Google sits through the funnel and how other platforms like Meta do a great job on demand generation. Bring that a little bit more to life for me. What does a winning visibility look like to you in a world where users can answer somewhere else and then move on to a scroll onto the ad and then an ad? What's the best sort of winning visibility looks like to you?
Yeah, I think it will be a disconnected journey, like you mentioned, and it always has been in many respects. Whether that was the invention of mobile phones and the prevalence of them, of multiple devices, be it tablets, mobile phones, laptops, work computers. That journey was always getting fractured, and Google Ads or Google Analytics was always doing a fairly poor job of always attributing those things together. Obviously, it was working hard to do that. So I think we've never had a perfect view of a full customer's journey. But I think, yeah, it's definitely starting on different areas, and there's within AI, there's a lot of people working on, for example, Claude offline. So they're working on their local machines. So I think that there is a lot of research being done that can't be captured, that can't be seen, because it's happening on local machines or local devices. So yeah, I think that will be harder to understand. But I think the fundamentally the same rules will apply. That people will spend certain time consuming certain types of content, which is around awareness, be that video formats, be that social formats, and then those are going to inspire or have the strongest chance to inspire them to move further down a funnel into a comparative area. Maybe it's a Pinterest, maybe it's a Google, and then from there onto the transaction side, so onto a Shopify or onto an Amazon, where they can make that purchase or make that comparison within a marketplace environment.
And if you were advising a retail CMO right now, what should they be doing to prepare for this AI-led search changes?
Yeah, I think twofold. One, I think the product data is really important. So there's just, missing out on opportunity by having poor product data, which is really the fundamental piece that it matters right now. Your competitors could be getting recommended in AI because, Google, because these platforms just don't know that your data is correct. And that also plays into Google Ads. It also plays into other channels. So fundamentally, making sure your product data is in a good format has never been so important and never been so rewarding. Also then, proving that out, proving those structures out through A/B testing, also very important. So that actually that is the right pattern for that product data and that you've got the complete product data set. And then I think there's elements like ads, maybe test them, but I think also that this is very, very early. So I think that the main point is not to get distracted or into the pure hype of it is coming. It's not just hype, but right now it is single digit. So, what I think could happen or is at risk is that people pull budget away or they pull their focus away from where it's working, whether that's Meta, whether that's Google, whether that's any other channel, marketplaces, for example, and actually they focus on something that is very, very early, which isn't going to be, isn't going to drive the same volume because it just can't right now. So it's important to be there, set the foundations, monitor it. But actually the key is to not get totally distracted from what's working and probably already has a lot of scale advantage. You can probably scale Meta, 1% more of Meta or 1% more of Google is probably like more than what you could get through some of these AI for volumes of sales right now.
Okay, all right, that's wonderful. And what should the CMOs stop obsessing over that will matter less in the next
I
18
think
months?
maybe kind of the vanity metrics. So I think, hopefully they've been trying to stop out some of these areas anyway. But I think, some of the vanity metrics, like how many clicks they're getting, I think obviously we all know that the quality of the click matters. It's just coming in from very low intent search terms, whether they're paid or organic. Just metrics like that. Oh, our site traffic's gone down, because particularly in these new AI products, you could get far less traffic, but it could be way higher converting. So I think, that's something really to consider. So yeah, just avoiding these vanity metrics of clicks, for example, and many others that are there, and maybe questioning the metrics that they are using. So, is ROAS, return on ad spend, is that the right metrics, or should they be looking at more of a profit driven model, or should they be looking at something else for their business, like new customers? That's what we're seeing is CMOs kind of really challenging the key assumptions of the metrics and getting smarter. So rather than just saying, great, we've got this ROAS, they're now looking at the profit. Rather than just getting customers, they're looking at new customer ratios as well.
That's great. We're coming slowly towards the end of the podcast. And I have a question for you. In 3 years' time, what will be the thing that the best retail marketeers will be doing that's different from today?
I think they'll have the fundamentals don't change. So I think they'll really be able to just have control over those metrics that we've talked about. So to be able to know that all of the products they're advertising are being advertised against the right target, whether that is winning new customers, whether that is profit, whether that is business metrics like sell-through rate, so how much volume they're selling versus how much they've got in stock. So I think these elements that have been very, very difficult will be really, will be much more prevalent, I hope. And also, I think the user journeys will evolve as well, so they'll become much more relevant. They'll become much more rich for shoppers to come through to the store, to have an experience rather than just a transaction. I think they're the exciting moments that we've got to come.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Liam. It has been an absolute pleasure having you on Flipping the Playbook. And thank you so much. You can find Liam's details on the show notes. His LinkedIn and also the company Bidnamic can be found online as well. Thank you so much.
Real pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Flipping the Playbook is produced by SALT.agency. We don't just optimize for search and AI. We optimize for business growth across SEO content and digital PR. Check out our links in the show notes. Thanks for listening.